The Witch's Oath. A modern woman inherits her grandmother's crumbling apothecary and discovers that the coven she belongs to never disbanded. The catch: she must marry a demon lord to secure her bloodline's magical pact, but he's nothing like the monster she imagined. The keys felt heavier than they should have in Lucy Chen's palm as she stood before the narrow storefront wedged between a trendy coffee shop and a vintage clothing boutique. The brass was tarnished black with age, and the largest key bore an intricate sigil that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at it. Moonrise Apothecary read the faded gilt letters across the dusty window, though half the O in apothecary had chipped away years ago. Lucy had driven 3 hours from Portland to this small Oregon coastal town she'd never heard of until the lawyer's call 2 weeks ago. Her grandmother's final gift, a business Lucy never knew existed. "You sure you want to go in there alone, miss?" The moving truck driver glanced nervously at the building's weathered facade. "Place gives me the creeps." Lucy managed a weak smile. "I'll be fine. Thanks for everything." She waited until the truck disappeared around the corner before approaching the door. The wood was painted deep forest green, though it had faded and peeled in places, revealing older layers of paint beneath: midnight blue, then burgundy, then something that might have been silver. Above the door hung a wreath of dried herbs that released a strange, spicy scent when the coastal breeze stirred it. The key turned easily despite its apparent age. Too easily, as if the lock had been waiting for her. The door swung open with a long creak that seemed to echo far longer than the small space should have allowed. Lucy stepped inside and immediately sneezed. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the front window, and the air was thick with the scent of dried plants, old books, and something else, something that reminded her of thunderstorms and midnight gardens. The space was smaller than it had appeared from outside, but somehow felt vast. Shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling, packed with glass jars containing mysterious substances. Some looked like ordinary herbs and spices, but others held things that definitely weren't found in any grocery store. A jar labeled Nightshade Tears contained what appeared to be glowing purple liquid. Another marked Phoenix Down held brilliant orange feathers that seemed to shimmer with their own heat. Behind the main counter, an old-fashioned cash register sat beside leather-bound ledgers and brass scales. A mortar and pestle made of what looked like black marble occupied the center of the workspace, surrounded by small glass vials and copper measuring spoons. Lucy had always known her grandmother was eccentric. Nai had lived in San Francisco's Chinatown, in an apartment above an herb shop that catered to old Chinese ladies seeking remedies for everything from arthritis to broken hearts. But Lucy had assumed it was just traditional medicine, not whatever this was. A piece of paper on the counter caught her eye: thick, cream-colored stationery with her name written in her grandmother's familiar handwriting. She picked it up with trembling fingers. "My dearest Lucy. If you are reading this, then the time has come for you to claim your birthright. I know this will come as a shock, but our family has guarded ancient secrets for 7 generations. The Chin women have always been witches, though we have hidden this truth in plain sight. The Moonrise Coven never disbanded, as the world believes. We simply learned to blend with the modern world. The apothecary is not just a business, it is a sacred trust, a place where magic and mundane meet. But there is something you must know, something I could never tell you while I lived. Our family's power comes with a price, sealed by blood and bound by ancient oaths. To maintain our magic, each generation must renew the pact our ancestors made centuries ago. The others will explain the details. They have been waiting for you. Remember, little star, that love often wears unexpected faces. All my love. Nai. P.S. Check the basement. The door is behind the bookshelf with the red binding." Lucy read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Witches? Ancient pacts? She'd always been practical, logical, an accountant who preferred spreadsheets to superstition. This had to be some kind of elaborate joke. But as she looked around the shop again, really looked, she began to notice things that defied easy explanation. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper than they should be, and when she moved, they didn't always move with her. The dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beam swayed gently despite the complete absence of any breeze. And the books, there were so many books, their spines bearing titles in languages she couldn't identify. Against her better judgment, Lucy found herself walking toward the back of the shop, searching for the bookshelf with red binding her grandmother had mentioned. She found it tucked into an alcove behind the counter, an entire section of books bound in deep crimson leather, their titles embossed in gold, lunar correspondences, the art of scrying, binding and banishment. She pulled on one of the books experimentally, and to her amazement, the entire bookshelf swung inward like a door, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Okay, nigh, Lucy whispered to herself. Let's see what other surprises you left me. The stairs creaked under Lucy's feet as she descended, her phone's flashlight casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The basement was older than the building above, much older. The walls were made of fitted stone blocks that looked medieval, and the air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, her light revealed a circular chamber with a vaulted ceiling. Candles and wall sconces flickered to life automatically as she entered, as if responding to her presence. Lucy jumped, her heart hammering, but forced herself to keep exploring. The room was clearly designed for gatherings. 13 chairs arranged in a perfect circle around a low stone table, its surface carved with intricate symbols that seemed to pulse with faint light. Books and scrolls lined built-in shelves, and Lucy spotted what appeared to be ritual tools, athemes, chalices, and crystals arranged on a side altar. But it was the portrait hanging on the far wall that made her breath catch. 7 women of varying ages stood together, all bearing a family resemblance she recognized. The woman in the center, wearing modern clothes and a slight smile, was unmistakably her grandmother, but younger, maybe 40 years old. The others wore clothing from different eras, spanning what looked like centuries. A brass nameplate at the bottom read, "The Chen Matriarchs, Keepers of the Moonrise Pact." I was wondering when you'd find your way down here. Lucy spun around, her phone clattering to the floor. A woman stood at the base of the stairs, tall, elegant, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. She looked like she could be heading to a board meeting, if not for the pentagram pendant hanging from her neck and the way the candlelight seemed to bend around her. "Who are you?" Lucy managed to ask, backing toward the altar. The woman smiled warmly. "Margaret Thornfield. I was your grandmother's closest friend and fellow coven member. I've been looking after the shop since she passed, waiting for you to arrive." She gestured around the chamber. "Welcome to your legacy, my dear." "This is insane," Lucy said, shaking her head. "Witches aren't real. Magic isn't real. This is all just..." She gestured helplessly at the ritual chamber. "Just what? Elaborate theater?" Margaret moved to one of the candles and passed her hand over the flame. It immediately turned blue, then green, then settled back to its normal golden color. "Your grandmother was one of the most powerful witches I've ever known. The ability runs strong in your bloodline." Lucy stared at the candle, trying to find a rational explanation. Trick candles. Or chemicals. Margaret's expression grew gentle but serious. "Lucy, I understand this is overwhelming. But you need to listen carefully, because time is running short. The Moonrise Coven has protected this region for over 3 centuries, keeping the balance between the magical and mundane worlds. Your family has been the anchor of that power since the beginning." She walked to the stone table and ran her finger along one of the carved symbols. It began to glow with soft silver light. "But our strength comes from an ancient pact, sealed in blood and binding magic. Every 7 generations, the pact must be renewed to maintain our abilities." "What kind of pact?" Lucy found herself asking, despite every rational instinct telling her to run. Margaret's expression grew somber. "Your ancestor, Ming Chen, was a powerful sorceress who fled China in the 1600s. She settled here and made a bargain with entities from the Shadow Realm, protection and power for her descendants, in exchange for a marriage bond between our bloodline and theirs." Lucy felt the blood drain from her face. "A marriage bond?" The seventh-generation heir must marry a demon lord to renew the pact. Your grandmother was the sixth generation. You are the seventh. The room seemed to spin around Lucy. She gripped the edge of the stone table for support. You're telling me I have to marry a demon? A demon lord, yes. But Lucy, you must understand, the beings we call demons aren't the Christian monsters of popular imagination. They are ancient entities from a parallel realm, with their own complex society and culture. The marriage is both symbolic and practical, binding our worlds together in mutual protection. Lucy laughed, a high, slightly hysterical sound. This is crazy. I'm not marrying anybody, let alone some supernatural monster. I have a life in Portland. I have a job, an apartment, A what? Margaret asked gently. A boyfriend who doesn't understand why you spend so much time alone? Friends who think you're eccentric? A job that feels hollow, like you're meant for something more? The words hit too close to home. Lucy had always felt like she was living slightly outside of normal life, never quite fitting in anywhere. She'd attributed it to being mixed race in mostly white spaces, or her family's quirky traditions, or just her own personality. But Margaret's description was uncomfortably accurate. Even if any of this were true, Lucy said slowly, what happens if I refuse? If I just walk away? Margaret's expression grew grave. The pact will break. The coven will lose its power, and the protections we've maintained for centuries will fail. Dark entities we've kept at bay will be free to enter this realm. And you'll lose whatever magical ability you possess, but not cleanly. The power will consume you from within. What magical ability? I don't have any magical ability. Margaret smiled sadly. Don't you? You've always been unusually intuitive, haven't you? Good at reading people, predicting outcomes? You probably thought it was just good instincts. Lucy opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. She had always been strangely good at knowing things she shouldn't know. When her college roommate was about to break up with her boyfriend, when her boss was planning layoffs, when storms were coming even when the weather forecast disagreed. The marriage ceremony must take place before the new moon, Margaret continued. That gives us exactly 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Lucy's voice cracked. You want me to marry a complete stranger, a demonic stranger, in 2 weeks? He's not a stranger, exactly. His name is Kieran Shadowmere, and he's been waiting for you for quite some time. He's not what you might expect. Before Lucy could ask what that meant, footsteps echoed on the stairs. Margaret's face lit up. Perfect timing. Lucy, I'd like you to meet your intended. Lucy turned toward the stairs, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. She braced herself for horns, scales, glowing red eyes, all the Hollywood demon imagery her mind could conjure. Instead, a perfectly ordinary man descended into the chamber. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it and sharp green eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that emphasized broad shoulders, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. He looked like he could be a college professor or a coffee shop owner, attractive in an approachable way, with laugh lines around his eyes and a crooked smile. You must be Lucy, he said, his voice warm with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. I'm Kieran. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Lucy stared at him, completely off balance. You're the demon lord? His smile widened, revealing perfectly normal white teeth. I prefer interdimensional diplomat, but yes, that's me. I know this is a lot to take in. You're so. She gestured helplessly at his very human appearance. Normal? Disappointed? He raised an eyebrow, looking amused. I was expecting something more demonic. Kieran laughed, a rich, genuine sound. Horns and sulfur? Sorry to disappoint. We save those for special occasions. He glanced at Margaret. Has she been briefed on the situation? I was just explaining about the pact, Margaret said. though I think she's still in shock. Lucy found her voice. I am definitely still in shock. This morning I inherited a mysterious apothecary. Now I'm apparently a witch who needs to marry a demon to save the world. Not the world, Kieran said seriously. Just this particular corner of it. Though I admit that doesn't make it sound much less overwhelming. He moved closer, and Lucy caught his scent, something like cedar and rain, completely human and oddly comforting. Lucy, I know how this must seem. But I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you beyond what the pact requires. This doesn't have to be a traditional marriage in the human sense. What does that mean? It means the bond is primarily magical, not personal. We'll need to perform the ceremony and maintain certain connections to keep the pact active. But I'm not looking to control your life or force you into anything you don't want. Margaret cleared her throat. Perhaps we should let Lucy process all this. It's a lot to absorb in one afternoon. Lucy nodded gratefully. Her head was spinning, and she needed time to think, preferably somewhere that didn't involve ancient ritual chambers and supernatural marriage proposals. Of course, Kieran said immediately. Lucy, why don't you take some time to explore the shop, get familiar with your grandmother's things? I'll be around if you have questions. You'll be around? Lucy asked. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I've been staying in the apartment above the shop, keeping an eye on things while Margaret handled the legal transfer. Don't worry, I can find somewhere else to stay while you're getting settled. There's an apartment upstairs? Third floor, Margaret said. Your grandmother's private space. She left it to you along with everything else. Lucy looked between them, feeling like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. I think I need some air. Of course, Kieran said. Take all the time you need. But Lucy? She turned back to him. Whatever you decide, we'll face it together. You're not alone in this. Something in his voice, warm and sincere, made her chest tighten unexpectedly. She nodded once and headed for the stairs, leaving the two supernatural beings in their candlelit chamber. Outside, the late afternoon sun felt like a blessing after the otherworldly atmosphere of the basement. Lucy walked to her car and leaned against it, breathing deeply of the salt air and trying to organize her chaotic thoughts. 2 hours ago, her biggest concern had been whether she could afford to renovate the shop. Now she was apparently a witch with a supernatural fiancé and a 2-week deadline to save her family's magical legacy. She looked back at the Moonrise Apothecary, its weathered facade somehow looking both mysterious and welcoming in the golden light. Through the front window, she could see Kieran moving around inside, apparently tidying up. He moved like someone familiar with the space, comfortable among the shelves of strange ingredients and magical artifacts. A demon lord who wore sweaters and cleaned shop counters. Lucy shook her head. If she was going to be thrust into a fantasy novel, couldn't it have at least followed the expected rules? But as she watched him work, she found herself noticing little details, the careful way he handled the glass jars, the soft smile that crossed his face when he discovered what looked like a note from her grandmother tucked between some books. Whatever else he might be, Kieran Shadowmere didn't seem like a monster. Lucy straightened her shoulders. She'd always prided herself on adapting to unexpected situations, and this was certainly the most unexpected situation of her life. But running away wouldn't answer any questions or solve any problems. Time to learn what being a witch actually meant, and figure out what she was going to do about her supernatural engagement. She walked back toward the apothecary, her keys feeling lighter in her hand than they had an hour ago. Whatever came next, at least she wouldn't have to face it alone. As she reached for the door handle, she could have sworn she heard her grandmother's voice on the breeze. Remember, little star, that love often wears unexpected faces. Lucy paused, looking up at the apartment windows on the 3rd floor. We'll see about that, Nai, she murmured, and stepped back into her new world. The next morning, Lucy woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of seagulls crying outside. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. Witches. Magic. An engagement to a demon lord. She groaned and pulled a pillow over her head. Maybe if she stayed in bed long enough, this would all turn out to be an elaborate dream. A soft knock at the apartment door made that hope evaporate. Lucy threw on jeans and a sweater and padded barefoot to answer it. Margaret stood in the hallway, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, holding a tray with coffee and what smelled like fresh pastries. "Good morning, dear. I thought you might need fortification before we begin your training." Lucy's stomach growled, reminding her that she'd been too overwhelmed to eat much the day before. "Training? Magical training. We have 2 weeks to awaken abilities that have been dormant your entire life. Best to start immediately." Margaret swept into the apartment and set the tray on the kitchen counter. "Kieran is downstairs preparing the lesson materials." Lucy poured herself coffee and took a grateful sip. "What kind of lesson materials?" "Nothing too intimidating for your first day. Basic energy work, simple spells, introduction to your family's particular magical traditions." Margaret studied Lucy's face. "How are you feeling about all this?" "Like I've fallen down the rabbit hole," Lucy said honestly. "But I read some of my grandmother's journals last night. Some of the things she wrote about, they explained things I never understood about my family." Such as? Lucy wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, using the warmth to ground herself. "Why my mother was always so afraid of storms, but my grandmother would stand outside during them with her arms open. Why certain people made me feel anxious for no reason I could identify. Why I always knew when something bad was about to happen." "Your intuitive abilities," Margaret said, nodding. "Very strong in your family line. Your grandmother could sense supernatural entities from miles away." "Is that why she never let me visit her during the full moon?" Margaret's eyebrows rose. "You noticed that?" "I thought it was just coincidence, but looking back." Lucy shook her head. "She was protecting me from something, wasn't she? From exposure to too much magical energy before you were ready. The full moon amplifies supernatural activity considerably. She was afraid it might awaken your abilities prematurely, before you had the knowledge to control them." Lucy thought about all the times she'd felt restless during full moons, pacing her apartment with an energy she couldn't explain. What would have happened if they had awakened early? Probably nothing catastrophic, but possibly overwhelming. Untrained magical ability can be chaotic. Margaret's tone was carefully neutral, but Lucy sensed there was more to the story. "Has that happened to other members of my family?" Margaret hesitated. "Your great-aunt Lily. She began manifesting abilities at 16, before her training was complete. She became overwhelmed by the constant psychic input and had what your family called a nervous breakdown. She spent several years in institutions before your grandmother was able to help her learn control." A chill ran down Lucy's spine. "Is she still alive?" "She lives quietly in Vancouver now, running a small bookshop. She chose not to practice magic after her experiences, which was probably wise. But Lucy, your situation is different. You're older, more stable, and you'll have proper guidance." Lucy nodded, but made a mental note to ask more questions about Aunt Lily later. She finished her coffee and grabbed a croissant from the tray. "What's the first lesson?" "Seeing magical energy. Come on, Kieran will be getting impatient, and punctuality is important in magical work." They descended to the shop's main floor, where Lucy found Kieran arranging various crystals on the counter. He looked up as they entered, and Lucy felt that same flutter in her chest she'd experienced the day before. This morning he wore dark jeans and a forest green henley that emphasized his eyes, and his hair was slightly mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it. "Good morning," he said, his smile warm but slightly tentative. "Ready for your first magic lesson?" "As ready as someone can be for something they're not sure they believe in," Lucy said. "Fair enough." Kieran picked up a piece of clear quartz and held it out to her. "Let's start simple. Hold this and tell me what you feel." Lucy took the crystal, expecting to feel nothing but cool stone. Instead, a subtle warmth spread through her palm, accompanied by a strange tingling sensation that traveled up her arm. "It's warm," she said, surprised. "What else?" Kieran asked. Lucy closed her eyes and focused on the sensations. The tingling grew stronger, and she could have sworn she felt a gentle pulse, like a heartbeat. "It feels alive?" "Excellent," Margaret said. "Most people feel nothing at all from crystals. The fact that you're sensing their energy immediately suggests your abilities are quite close to the surface." Kieran moved closer, and Lucy opened her eyes. "Now look at the crystal while you're holding it. Don't focus on its physical appearance, try to see beyond that." Lucy stared at the quartz, trying to understand what he meant. At first she saw only clear stone, but gradually she began to notice something else. A faint shimmer around the edges, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. "There's light around it," she said uncertainly. Kieran's face lit up. "You're seeing its aura. That's remarkable progress for a first attempt. Most students take weeks to develop aura sight," Margaret added. "Your grandmother was right about your potential." Lucy set the crystal down, feeling slightly dizzy. "Is it normal for this to be exhausting?" "Very normal," Kieran assured her. "You're using senses you've never consciously accessed before. It's like exercising muscles you didn't know you had." He moved to the other crystals on the counter. "Try these, one at a time. See if you can sense differences between them." Over the next hour, Lucy worked her way through an assortment of stones. Each one felt different, some warm, some cool, some practically vibrating with energy, others calm and soothing. The amethyst made her feel peaceful, while a piece of black tourmaline seemed to absorb something from the air around it. "That one's protective," Margaret explained when Lucy commented on the tourmaline's strange pull. "It absorbs negative energy." "Negative energy from what?" "All sorts of things. Hostile emotions, psychic attacks, supernatural entities with ill intent." Margaret's tone was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. Lucy looked around the shop with new eyes. "Are there things like that here? Supernatural entities?" "Not at the moment," Kieran said. "But this is a border town between the mundane and magical worlds. We get all sorts of visitors. Which is why the apothecary's protections are so important," Margaret added. "Your grandmother maintained wards that keep the truly dangerous things at bay while allowing harmless magical creatures to pass through safely." Lucy felt a new weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "And I'm supposed to maintain these protections?" "We'll teach you," Kieran said gently. "And you won't be doing it alone. The coven shares the burden." "Speaking of which," Margaret said, checking her watch, "the others will be here soon. I thought you should meet them before we go any further." Lucy's stomach clenched. "Others?" "The rest of the Moonrise Coven. There are 8 of us in total, including you." Margaret moved to unlock the front door. "Don't worry, they're all eager to meet you." As if summoned by her words, the door chimed and a woman entered. She appeared to be in her 50s, with curly brown hair streaked with silver and wearing flowing purple scarves over dark jeans. She radiated the kind of warm energy that made Lucy immediately want to hug her. "You must be Lucy," the woman exclaimed, her voice carrying a slight southern accent. "I'm Diana Blackwood. I've been so excited to meet you." Before Lucy could respond, Diana had pulled her into a fierce hug that smelled like lavender and vanilla. "Your grandmother talked about you constantly. She was so proud." More footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of others. A young man with spiky black hair and multiple piercings descended from what Lucy now realized was another entrance to the building. Behind him came a woman who looked to be in her 30s, with long dark hair and serious brown eyes. "This is Tommy Chen, no relation, the name's coincidental," Margaret said, indicating the young man. "And Sarah Martinez, our resident expert on protective magic." "Any relation to the Chens would be pretty distant anyway," Tommy said with a grin that revealed dimples. "My family's been here since the gold rush." He looked Lucy up and down appraisingly. "Nice aura." Very stable. You can see auras? Lucy asked. One of my specialties. Yours is mostly silver and gold, with some green threads. Classic Chin family colors, according to the historical records. Sarah stepped forward with a more reserved smile. Welcome to the family, Lucy. I know this must be overwhelming. That's an understatement, Lucy said, but found herself smiling back. There was something comforting about being surrounded by people who accepted the magical world as normal. The door chimed again, and 3 more people entered together, an elderly man with a neat white beard, a middle-aged woman with bright red hair, and a teenage girl who couldn't be more than 17. Professor Hartwell, Margaret said, indicating the elderly man. Rebecca Frost and her daughter Emma. Professor Hartwell had the bearing of someone accustomed to academic authority, but his eyes were kind behind wire-rimmed glasses similar to Kieran's. Miss Chen, an honor to meet you. I've been researching your family's magical history for my dissertation on American coven structures. Rebecca Frost looked like a stereotypical suburban mom, complete with yoga pants and a coffee cup, but Lucy noticed she wore several protective amulets as jewelry. Her daughter Emma hung back slightly, her purple-streaked hair falling over her face. And that makes 8, Margaret said with satisfaction. The Moonrise Coven, complete for the first time in 7 years. Lucy looked around the group, feeling simultaneously welcomed and overwhelmed. 7 years? Since your grandmother's illness began affecting her magical abilities, Professor Hartwell explained. We've been operating at reduced capacity, maintaining only the most essential protections. Which is why awakening your full power is so critical, Sarah added. And why the marriage pact needs to be renewed. The town's supernatural defenses are running on reserves that won't last much longer. Emma spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens if the defenses fail completely? The adults exchanged glances, and Lucy sensed there was something they weren't saying. Nothing immediately catastrophic, Margaret said carefully. But over time, the barrier between dimensions would weaken. Creatures from the shadow realm would find it easier to cross over. What kind of creatures? Lucy asked. It was Kieran who answered, his expression serious. Most are harmless, shadow sprites, minor elementals, lost souls looking for passage to the afterlife. But some. He paused. Some are predatory. They feed on human fear, or life force, or in extreme cases, souls themselves. Lucy felt cold despite the warm morning sunlight streaming through the shop windows. And my marriage to you would prevent that? The marriage bond creates a permanent bridge between our realms, Kieran explained. It allows us to share power and maintain the barriers without depleting the coven's reserves. But it has to be a true marriage, Diana added gently. The magic recognizes intention. A purely ceremonial union wouldn't be sufficient. Lucy's heart began to race. What does true marriage mean, exactly? Margaret cleared her throat. Complete emotional and magical commitment to each other. The bond has to be real, or it won't hold. Lucy looked at Kieran, who was studying her with an unreadable expression. So we have to actually fall in love? In 2 weeks? Not necessarily love, Professor Hartwell said. But genuine care, trust, and willingness to build a life together. The magic can sense the difference between authentic partnership and pretense. Lucy felt the walls of the shop closing in on her. And if we can't manage that? Silence fell over the group. Finally, Emma spoke up again, her young voice carrying more weight than it should have. Then the darkness comes, she said simply. And people start disappearing. The coffee shop Kieran led her to was the same one Lucy had noticed next to the apothecary, a cozy place called Tide and Time with weathered wood tables and the kind of atmosphere that invited lingering. The barista, a woman in her 20s with intricate braids and multiple tattoos, greeted Kieran like an old friend. The usual? She asked, then noticed Lucy and smiled. And you must be the new owner of the apothecary. I'm Zoe. Lucy. Nice to meet you. What can I get you? Fair warning, we specialize in drinks that are probably too fancy for their own good. Lucy studied the menu board, which featured items like sage and honey cordido and lavender moon milk latte. What's Kieran's usual? Double shot Americano with a dash of cinnamon and something he brings from home that he won't tell me what it is, Zoe said with mock suspicion. Kieran looked embarrassed. It's just a spice blend from my realm. Nothing magical, just different flavor profile. I'll try the sage and honey cordido, Lucy decided. They settled at a corner table by the window, and Lucy found herself relaxing in the normal rhythm of a coffee date. Kieran asked about her life in Portland, and she found herself talking about her work, her tiny apartment, her weekend routines. You sound like you were lonely, Kieran observed gently. Lucy considered this. Not exactly lonely. More like, waiting. Like I was living a placeholder life until something real came along. She stirred her coffee absently. What about you? What's your life like in the shadow realm? Structured. Formal. I have responsibilities overseeing trade agreements between different dimensional territories, which involves a lot of bureaucracy and diplomacy. Kieran's mouth quirked upward. Not as exciting as it sounds. Do you enjoy it? It's important work, and I'm good at it. But enjoyable? Kieran shrugged. I've always felt like I was managing other people's priorities rather than pursuing my own. What would you pursue, if you could choose freely? Kieran was quiet for a moment, considering. I'd like to study magic more deeply, not just use it, but understand how it works across different realms. Maybe teach, or research. And I'd like to travel, see more of this world. He met her eyes. Share those experiences with someone. The longing in his voice was unmistakable, and Lucy felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. It sounds like we're both ready for our lives to actually begin. Is that how this feels to you? Like a beginning? Lucy looked around the coffee shop, taking in the casual atmosphere, the sound of normal conversation, the sight of Kieran sitting across from her looking perfectly human and increasingly appealing. It feels like possibility, she said finally. Which is more than I've felt in a long time. Kieran's smile was soft and genuine. I'll take possibility. They spent another hour talking, covering everything from favorite books to travel dreams to their most embarrassing childhood memories. Lucy found herself laughing more than she had in months, and gradually the surreal aspects of their situation faded into the background. When they finally returned to the apothecary, the coven had dispersed, leaving only Margaret arranging inventory behind the counter. How did it go? She asked, looking pleased by their relaxed demeanor. Better than expected, Lucy said. What's next on the magical training agenda? This afternoon, we'll work on basic energy manipulation. Tonight, Kieran will show you how to access the shop's protective wards so you can begin learning to maintain them. Margaret glanced between them. And tomorrow, we'll begin preparing for the bonding ceremony itself. Lucy felt her stomach flutter. What does that involve? Understanding the ritual components, practicing the magical techniques you'll need, and... Margaret paused delicately. Discussing the more intimate aspects of the bonding process. Intimate aspects? Lucy's voice came out higher than intended. The magical bond requires physical contact during the ceremony, Kieran explained, his cheeks coloring slightly. Nothing inappropriate, but we'll need to be comfortable touching each other without distraction. Lucy tried to imagine holding hands with Kieran while channeling magical energy and found the idea both appealing and nerve-wracking. Right. Okay. One step at a time. The afternoon passed in a blur of magical instruction. Margaret guided Lucy through exercises in energy manipulation, learning to feel the flow of magic around her, then to direct it with intention. By the end of the session, Lucy could make candle flames dance and cause flowers to bloom faster, though the effort left her exhausted. Magical exercise uses different muscles than physical exercise, Margaret explained as Lucy slumped in a chair. But like any skill, it gets easier with practice. As evening approached, Kieran took over Lucy's instruction, leading her down to the basement chamber where the protective ward anchors were housed. The stone table, Lucy learned, wasn't just decorative, it was the focal point for magical energy that flowed through the entire building and extended out into the town. The wards work in layers, Kieran explained, running his hands over the carved symbols. The innermost layer protects the shop itself. The next layer covers a 6-block radius. The outermost layer extends to the town boundaries. How do I check if they're working properly? Kieran guided her hand to one of the symbols. Feel for the energy flow. It should be steady and warm, like a heartbeat. Lucy pressed her palm to the stone and concentrated. At first she felt nothing, then gradually became aware of a subtle pulse beneath her hand. But something felt off. The rhythm was irregular, and the warmth seemed weaker than it should be. It's not steady, she said, concerned. No, it's not. Kieran's expression was serious. The wards have been degrading faster than we anticipated. That's why the timing of the bonding ceremony is so critical. Lucy looked around the chamber with new understanding. How long before they fail completely? At the current rate of degradation? Maybe 3 weeks. Possibly less. The weight of responsibility settled on Lucy's shoulders again. So if we can't make the marriage bond work, we'll find another solution, Kieran said firmly. But Lucy, I want you to know that I believe we can make this work. Not because we have to, but because I think we're genuinely compatible. Lucy studied his face in the candlelight. Over the course of the day, her initial attraction to him had only grown stronger. He was intelligent, kind, funny, and treated her like an equal partner rather than an obligation to be managed. Under different circumstances, she could easily imagine falling for him.